Please welcome Horace Hawthorne.
My name is Horace H. Hawthorne, and I hail from the town of Kennebunkport, which is way down east in the great state of Maine. I was born and raised in Kennebunkport, and a fella asked me the other day, "You lived here all your life?" And I said, "Well, not yet." Now, I've only been out to the state of Maine 2 or 3 times in my life. And this is the first time that I have come all the way out to the city of Seattle. I come here to visit my grandson, Charlie. He works for a company called Microsoft. He told me they make software, which between you and me, I think is a polite way of saying they make ladies' undergarments. Now, the day I arrived, Charlie had to go to work, so he sent me off to take a look around a pat of town they call Pioneer Square. I had to look around down there till I got a bit thirsty, so I went into a shop to get a cup of coffee. I went in there, and there were a young fella behind the counter. Must have been a sailor, because of the fact he had lots of tattoos on his hands, and rings in his ears and in his nose. And you know what that sailor asked me? He said, "What kind of coffee do you want?" Now, in all my 87 years, no one has ever asked me that question. I told him I'd take whatever kind of coffee he had, whether it be Beech Nut or Hills Brothers or Chase and Sanborn. It didn't matter. Well, that weren't good enough. He proceeded to ask me a whole string of questions having to do with tall or short or single or double, and then he started speaking Italian to me. I told him I would study upon the matter and get back to him the next day. And I left. And as I was walking out of that shop, a whole raft of people come along the sidewalk and muckled around me so tight, I had no choice but to walk with them. I turned to the fellow next to me and I asked him where it was we was going. He told me we're going to see Hawk Stadium. I said, "Well, I don't know who this fella Hawk Stadium is, but he must be a pretty important fella if so many people are going to see him." So I went along with him. And after a while, we came to this large structure. It appeared to me to be a sort of a water system for collecting rainwater. Except it had a gate in front of it, and there were a young fella there saying, "Ticket, please." And I said, "Young fella, I don't have a ticket. I don't even know where it is I'm going. But first chance I get, I'll turn around and come back out." On we went, upstairs and through doors, until finally, those people I was with, they got where it was they was a-going, because they patted. And when they patted, I could begin to see where it was I'd fetched up. What I saw was 2 rafts of people sitting on high banks, staring at each other across a pretty little green cow pasture. Except somebody had gone and drawn white lines up and down that pasture, and there were a group of convicts in striped shirts running up and down, blowing whistles. There were also a group of young ladies in short skirts that was jumping up and down and hollering. That interested me. So I sat down to see what was going to happen. And after a few minutes, this group of young men with large shoulders and buckets on their heads comes running out to one end of this large outhouse. And all the people I was sitting with stood up and commenced to holler. Then another group of young men come out to the other end of that outhouse, and the people in the other bank stood up and hollered. Well, those 2 groups of young men, they faced off against each other. And folks, they begun a fight, and it was the awfulest fight I have ever seen. And you know what they was fighting about? There was this funny-looking little pumpkin. And both of those groups of young men wanted that pumpkin something awful. But you know, it couldn't have been any good to eat because I saw them toss that around and kick it around all afternoon and it never even busted. So it must have been had as a rope. But they wanted it. When one group got a hold of it, it made the other group as mad as a hornet's nest. They would run at each other and knock each other down and pile up on top of each other. Sometimes one of them would get hurt. They'd run him off the field in a stretcher and run a new one on. But you know, I never did get to find out the outcome of that fight. Because that young fella that said, "Ticket, please," he come over to me and told me I had to leave because I didn't have a ticket. So I left, and I was mighty puzzled about this. I puzzled and puzzled about it, and finally I called up my friend Bert, back in Kennebunkport, Maine. He answered on his cell phone out in the outhouse, where he was sitting and reading the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Now I told him what I had seen. And he said, "Oh, Horace, you old fool, that were a football game." "Football," says I, "what's that?" He said, "Well, you see, it's a kind of a contest to see which one of them men can take that pumpkin and run with it from one end of that cow pasture to the other without either getting knocked down or stepping in something." That's what football is all about. Now I hear that out in Seattle you get a bit of rain. Well, we get some weather up in Maine as well. Yeah, it starts into raining in September, gets heavier in October, and then in November the weather improves when it begins to snow. And it snows straight through December and January and February, and then in March begins to turn back to rain again. By the time April comes around, well, we do get some mud in the streets. I remember back before they paved the streets in Kennebunkport, one afternoon I went downtown to pick up my back issues of the Saturday Evening Post. And I was coming out of the post office when I spied a hat floating down the middle of Main Street in the mud. And I said, "By Gary, I know that hat. That belongs to my friend Bert. And he'd be awful sorry to lose it." So I reached up into a tree, pulled down a dead branch, and leaned out until that hat come alongside me, and I snatched it up. And by Gary, underneath the hat, there was Bert's head. He said, "Good morning, Horace." I said, "Good morning, Bert. Looks to me like you got yourself in a bit of a pickle." He said, "Oh no, I'm all right. To tell you the truth, I'm a mite bit worried about this horse I'm riding." We also get some windstorms up in Kennebunkport. I remember a nor'easter that blew for 3 days one October. And on the third day of the storm, there were a row of wind come ashore out on Devil's Point, slithered along the beach for about a mile till it hit the harbour. Then it turned right down Main Street, took a right to the schoolhouse, and headed straight for my friend Bert's farm. Now the summer before, Bert and I had spent 2 weeks putting a new tin roof on that van. And wouldn't you know, that wind just dipped down low over Bert's cornfield and come up right under the eaves of that roof, lifted the roof off the van and carried it 1.5 miles away to the side of Old Skunk Mountain. The next morning, when the storm had abated, Bert and I went up to inspect the damage. We found that roof all twisted up. Bert says to me, "Horace, what do you think I should do?" I said, "Bert, tell you what, you crack that roof up, take it down to the depot, and send it off by rail to the Henry Ford Motor Company and sell it as scrap." And that's just what he did. A year later, he got a letter from Mr. Henry Ford himself saying, "Mister, we don't know what happened to your cat, but if you'll tell us the year and the model number, we'll work overtime to get her back in shape." Now, when I mention that I come from Kennebunkport, many people think of our most famous resident, Mr. George Herbert Bush. Now, Mr. Bush is in the political game, and from what I understand, he took his son into the business with him, and they've done pretty good. Now, I remember the first day George Bush come to Kennebunkport. Matter of fact, I was the first person he spoke with. Yeah. I was sitting out in front of a Sutherland's IGA store when I saw a black limousine with 6 Secret Service cabs appear down at one end of town. And they come tearing towards me at high speed. And they tore right past me, headed for the other end of town. Come to a stop down by the old blueberry factory, turned around and headed back for me. This time they stopped right out in front of me. The window rolled down on the limousine, a fellow leaned out and said, "Hi, my name's George Bush. I'm from Texas. Can you tell me which way to Kennebunkport?" Kennebunkport, let me see. Well, you can keep on going the way you're going till you get to that place where that fella used to keep that vegetable stand about 20 years ago. And make a left there. And then go along until you get to Virgil Bliss's house. You'll know it when you get there. It's the worst house in town. When you get there, turn around and come back, because you've gone too fast. Let me see, what you do after that? Well, you know, then again, you can go back this way. Go along till you come to a house that looks like a van, make a left there, and then make a right when you come to a van that looks like a house. And that will put you on the county highway. It turns to dirt now and again. And it'll bring you to that fork in the road. But I can't remember what you do there. You know, the simplest thing, mister, for you to do, you see that cow patch over there? That belongs to my friend Bert. He won't mind if you drive across it. Just drive straight across it until you see Bert's bull. When Bert's bull sees you, he'll begin to charge you. But that's all right. Just keep going until you see the whites of his eyes. And then you make a sharp left. That will bring you right to the edge of the river. That river's only a foot or two deep, so long as you keep upstream of the waterfall. You go right across it. And that'll bring you out to the turnpike. And then take out your compass. And, whether you go north or south, I'm not sure. Come to think of it, you can't get there from here. Now, us old timers, we have a hard time getting used to this newfangled technology. I'll give you an example of that. I remember when my mother, Hattie, had her 105th birthday, and we celebrated it down at the old Grange Hall with a grand birthday party. In honor of the occasion, my sister made a monumental jello mold in the shape of Hattie's head. My brother performed a stirring rendition of the Battle Hymn of the Republic on his tuba. My grandson Charlie brought along one of these newfangled video cameras, and he proceeded to make a nuisance of himself, taking pictures of everything and everyone at that party. And I had to laugh, because I knew there couldn't be any film in that camera, for I didn't hear a click nor see a flash the whole time he was taking those pictures. But then at the end of the party, he surprised me some. He took a wire and strung it from that camera to the television set there in the Grange Hall, and proceeded to show us sort of a movie of that party. And it worked pretty good, and Hattie enjoyed it. Well, it was getting late by then, so we took Hattie back to the old folks' home where she was a living, And when we got there were a group of old ladies a-sitting and a-rocking in rocking chairs out on the porch. And they called out, "Well, Hattie, how was your birthday, Hattie?" And my mother said, "Well, if you'd been watching TV, you'd know." Now, I've got to tell you a little something about the stingiest man in town, Virgil Bliss. Now, Virgil was so stingy that he didn't give his children middle names because he said he couldn't afford them. And after he died, they found a little box in his house, clearly marked, "Pieces of string too short to use." Virgil was stingy with his wife as well. Never did anything special for her, except for that one year he took her to the Skowhegan State Fair. They took her on lunch so they wouldn't have to spend nothing. But towards the end of the day, they come across this bi-winged aeroplane. And there were a sign there said, "Aeroplane rides $10. And Virgil's wife, she got it into her head that she wanted to ride in that airplane. But Virgil would have nothing to do with it. Well, the pilot of that aeroplane, he saw what was going on, so he come over to Virgil and he says, "Mister, I'll make you an offer. If you and your wife can ride in that aeroplane for 10 minutes and not make a sound, I'll give you the ride for free. But if you should utter one word or cry out one time, you'll have to pay me the $10. Now, Virgil loved to get something for nothing, so he agreed. They clung into that aeroplane, and 2 minutes later, they were soaring high above the Ferris wheel. And that pilot proceeded to do a series of acrobatic maneuvers with that plane. He did barrel rolls, loop-de-loops, and finally the falling leap. 10 minutes later, they were back on the ground. The pilot, looking a bit chagrined, said to Virgil, "Well, mister, I guess you got your free ride. But tell me, didn't you feel like crying out or shouting even once?" "No," said Virgil, a mite bit proud-like. "Except for that one time we turned upside down and my wife fell out." Every man gets his comeuppance. And Virgil got his. It were about 15 years later. Virgil took ill. He got into his bed, and he stayed there for the best part of a year. His daughter Eunice come to take care of him, and Virgil had raised Eunice to be every bit as stingy as he was. Towards the end of the year, the doctor gave Virgil 1 week to live. So Eunice began preparations for his end. One day, Virgil was lying up in the bed when he smelled a powerful smell of rhubarb pie coming up from the kitchen. Now, because rhubarb grew wild all around that house, there weren't nothing Virgil loved more than rhubarb pie. For the first time in a year, he got up out of that bed, crawled across the bedroom floor, down the stairs, into the kitchen. And there he saw 9 pies, sitting and a-cooling up in the windowsills. Well, Virgil went to the kitchen drawer, got out a fork, pulled himself up to one of them windows, and was just about to dig into one of them pies, when his daughter Eunice come into the room, slapped the fork out of his hand, and said, "Shame on you, father. Those aren't for now, those are for the funeral." Next day, It was that same day, Virgil was so broken up about that, it's a sad story but true, he crawled out into the van, took down his shotgun and put himself out of his misery right then and there. The next day, Eunice was in town preparing for the funeral a little bit earlier than expected, when Tut Tut, the editor of the newspaper, come up to her with a notebook in his hand and said, "Eunice, wouldn't you like to put a special obituary in the paper in honor of your father?" She said, "How much will it cost?" He said, $1 a word. "All right," said Eunice, "let it say, Virgil died." I wrote that down, and he said, "There's a $5 minimum, so you still got 3 words coming to you." "All right," said Eunice, "let it say, Virgil died, shotgun for sale." It's a sad story, and it goes to show you it doesn't pay to be stingy in your life. It pays to be generous, but you know, you got to be wise with your generosity. Last Christmas, I were up to Bangor doing my Christmas shopping, and I bought presents for my wife, my children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, my cousins, my nephews. Well, my wallet was just about empty when I run into this little Salvation Army girl who was ringing a bell, and she said to me, "Mister, wouldn't you like to give something to the Lord?" And I said, "Young lady, how old are you?" 19. "Well," I said, "I'm 87. So chances are I'll be passing on before you will. Isn't that true?" "Yes, sir." "Chances are I'll be seeing the Lord before you do." "Yes, sir." "Well, if I'm going to give something to the Lord, I might as well just hand it to him myself." Well, it looks like it's about time for me to head down to the depot so as I can catch that last train back to Kennebunkport. But if any of you are ever down east, you look me up in Kennebunkport, you'll find me out sitting in a whittling out in front of Sutherland's IGA store. You have a standing invitation to go out fishing with Bert and I.
Wonderful.